Hey there, welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, where we're expanding the natural family planning conversation. I'm your host, Ellen Holloway. All right, we are welcoming back Martha to the podcast. Martha's been on an episode, quite a few months ago.
It was a while ago.
It was a while ago, yeah. Well, I'm really excited to have you back, Martha.
It's good to be here, Ellen.
Awesome. And so today, this is kind of the 180 flip of the episode we had last week. So last week we talked about when abstinence is really hard and what you do. And so now we're going to talk about when abstinence isn't that hard. So Martha, what, just taking a step back and starting from scratch, what do you feel like has been your overall feeling toward abstinence?
I'm not a huge fan. It's difficult. It takes a lot of self-discipline. You know, I'm sure you cover all of this in your other episode, but you know, it's not easy, as in it's not a joyful thing to have to deal with. Let's
I think joyful is a great word to say here, that it's not. It's not a joyful thing.
Oh, yay, abstinence. You know, that's not really what you want to be communicating, but just because it's not like, I think it's like any other discipline, like fasting, where it's not like, oh, yay, I'm going to go fast, you know, but it does have its benefits, and it has its place, and but yeah, it's not my favorite thing in the world, I would say.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm with you there. Yeah. All right. So, when would you say has been like a time or a season of your life when periodic abstinence hasn't been as difficult as it might be in just normal time?
Oh, goodness. There have been two for us. One is when I have little kids, and they are very little and they are constantly touching me all day. Periodic abstinence is not difficult at that point for me at all, because I'm already filled up in terms of touch. So if you're talking about different ways to show affection, I really get tired of being touched after a certain point, especially with little kids, because they need that, and they need that constant reassurance. And you're up in the middle of the night and you're touching, and then your husband comes up and he's like, oh, I want to touch you too. And you're like, no, thank you. I'm good. I'm really good without that right now.
To be my whole self right now by myself.
Exactly. So that makes it easier. Like when you have other inputs in your life that fulfill that touch need, I guess, and your time and your energy are already expended, it makes abstaining easier. It really does. And then also, if you have a time when the rules in your marriage are different. So a lot of couples, they go through health problems, like my family did. We did go through some health problems, and I was in a caregiver role for my husband, and we're not really thinking about anything intimate at that point.
Your brain's really thinking about a lot of different things. Like on either side, right? If you are personally going through health problems, you're probably focusing on trying to heal your body.
Exactly.
And if you're in the caregiver role, a lot of times, like, you're just focusing on trying to heal your spouse and you know, also take care of the rest of the house while
the life. Yes.
Yeah. The whole rest of life. Yeah. Any kids that are there, any cooking, any cleaning, any working, like all of those things fall suddenly onto the caregiver.
Do you think about marriage being 50-50, but so often it's not. And sometimes in those times when one or the other of you is shouldering a larger load in certain areas, intimacy is the last thing on anybody's mind. And yes, it's important to connect to each other, but it doesn't have to be through sex. It really doesn't. And valuing each other and taking care of each other and being married in that way, that goes beyond that level of physical intimacy, can can really, I don't know, it's still taking care of each other. It's still showing affection. It's still being married. It's not a lack of physical intimacy does not mean you're not married anymore. Like that's
right.
not, that's not really what's happening. So seasons when it's easier is usually when you have other things going on and your attention is divided. I mean, when you first get married, abstinence is really hard because it's new and it's different and it's beautiful and it's the sacrament of marriage. It's just wonderful. And then as life keeps going, sometimes you hit those seasons when it is easier, when you can get through those 2 weeks or however long your cycle is, and you're like, oh, it's over already? That's okay. That's great. All right.
Right.
Going, you know, and you don't even realize it. And so, especially if you're tracking and you're going through and maintaining your tracking during that time, it can surprise you when you hit that, oh, green means go, let's go. And you're going, wait a minute, what happened to the abstinence part? And that's okay too. Like not being like heartbroken and feeling oppressed by the abstinence. It doesn't have to be that way in order for you to have a healthy marriage. And you don't have to be like, oh, what's wrong with my marriage if I'm not like missing and desiring my husband during this time? Sometimes there's other stuff going on, and that's okay too.
Yes, I think that's a really key point. Like, I feel like I hear a lot about how difficult abstinence is, and I don't disagree. Abstinence is difficult, especially during specific seasons of life too. But I think it's really important to just catalog the fact that for some people, abstinence, even just abstinence in general, isn't that hard. Or there are seasons like what you were talking about, Martha, where abstinence just, it's almost like you don't even think about it because you're focusing on so many other things. And so I just want everybody to know that that's okay. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with your marriage if the abstinence part isn't that difficult. You know, I feel like, I think it was recently I heard from someone who was like, well, my cycles are really normal, or really regular. And it's like, it's always just about like 10 to 12 days and it's just over quickly. And I just like, it's never really an issue. That's great. If you fall into that category, that's fantastic. I'm so happy for you.
Well, it can change too. Like you can't, if you're struggling with abstinence now, that means in the future, maybe it'll get easier. You never know. For me, it definitely got easier when the kids came around, also because, you know, with my background, I grew up Protestant, and my mom, her biggest issue with NFP in general was that I wasn't going to be available to my husband at all times, which could cause numerous problems, according to her, with my marriage, that I was not going to be available to her. But to me, abstinence has also been a relief because I can say, okay, during this part of my cycle, I don't have to be available. I'm focused on other parts of our relationship. I'm focused on the way we interacted before we got married, the things that we enjoyed together before things became physical, and how I can really be myself with him outside of that. I don't know if that makes sense, but
absolutely.
There's such amount of pressure put on women from my background where you're constantly like, you have to be 100% available physically at all times. And so not having that is also a relief for me.
Right. Well, I think there's such an aspect of our relationships, our married relationships, beyond the intimacy level of sex. That is the ultimate method of intimacy and communication I think we could all agree on that is the ultimate way to connect with our spouse. But that's not the only way. Exactly. And we need to be connecting with our spouses in other ways. And we need to be speaking their love language, especially if it's not physical touch. Like yes. if your spouse's love language is acts of service or is, words of affirmation or, one of the other ones, I can't even think of all of them right now. Yes. Then the period of abstinence can help you refocus on that and have like a little check-in of like, am I attentive to my spouse in these other ways? Am I, performing acts of service to show my spouse that I love him or her? And
you're still married.
Right.
Like
right.
You're you're still married.
You don't just become brother and sister.
Exactly. But it also helps me to be more available than when it is time to be intimate. Like having that time off for me is a blessing. It's a chance for me to refocus and reconnect in other ways. And then when it is time, it's like, oh, well, yeah, of course. Let's go. It's time. I'm ready. I'm there. And I'm 100% there. It's not this, he's coaxing me or trying to make sure that, hey, is today a good day? There's none of that. It's like, well, yeah, of course it is. Let's go. Come on. This is go time. We are in this together and this is our time. And that makes it easier for me, but that also, I don't know if it makes it easier for him.
Right. That's a really important part to talk about is that, while, we're talking woman to woman right now, and we're definitely only speaking from our personal experience.
Yes.
On the other side, your spouse might not feel that way. Like, if we go back to your example, Martha, with like little kids and being touched out, I can just, especially with, nursing.
Yes.
Like,
oh my, yes.
The husband in the relationship is not getting that physical touch that exactly. you are during a nursing relationship, because, for the most part, I think it's at minimum like 2 hours throughout your day of nursing. Like that's kind of the average.
That's being very conservative.
Minimum. Yeah, I know. That's like the minimum you have to meet. I think that's kind of like, that's like what lactation consultants say, like your kid has to total be nursing for 2 hours.
Oh my goodness.
But it's probably,
I think we were overachievers.
Yeah. Like maybe 4, 5, 6.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And yeah, he was, it was not the same for my husband, but we were talking about it and he was honest with me when things were hard. And I was honest right back, like
that is so amazing.
Yeah. Yes. And that doesn't always happen either, but I think that's something to strive for, that we can tell our spouse when things are hard. And that doesn't mean the other person has to immediately go fix anything. Mm-hmm. So just because he was having a hard time doesn't mean that I need to put aside my needs in that moment to completely, he doesn't get any touch. Therefore, I have to completely let go of all of my problems and being touched out and go and touch him for a long time. That's not what that meant. It does mean maybe some compromise or some discussion or some finding ways to connect and physical touch isn't relegated to just sex. So
right.
There's other ways of touching each other, I guess, to do. And so yeah, it's difficult, but it's not, it's a road that you travel together best.
Yes, absolutely. It's difficult. It's not impossible. Yeah. And I think the key that you mentioned, Martha, was that he was 100% honest to you, and you were 100% honest back. Like,
yes,
it's not just that, okay, let's say your spouse comes to you and you're in a season where abstinence is not very hard. Your spouse comes to you and is like, oh my gosh, this is really, really hard. You don't just have to fold right there
exactly.
and be like, okay, I'll do anything for you. Like, no, this is a conversation. This is a relationship. You both need to give. And so, yes, you may need to step out of your comfort zone a little bit. And your spouse may need to step out of his or her comfort zone a little bit and meet somewhere in the middle and have a compromise. But that comes from 100% honesty in a conversation.
Exactly. And, you know, I really respect my husband. I mean, he's completely different than the men I was raised to assume were like men. I guess he's full of self-control and care for me and respect. And, you know, we've built that over years and years of marriage now, but I wouldn't trade that for the world. I mean, having his respect and his care in that way, when he knows it's, you know, I'm just not there. And he's like, all right, I can wait. I love you. It's all right. And having that ability for him that he's developed over many years. Like, it's not that it's easy. But he's worked on that, and he can look at me now and be like, you know, it's all right. I'm okay. And I still feel loved by you. And I know that, you know, this is the way it is right this second. It doesn't mean it's the way forever. And that's something else to remember, that these seasons of abstinence, they're a period of time. It's not forever. It's not that you're not saying no, you're saying wait. And that focus can really change how things are between the two of you too. Like, that, changing how you communicate about it, asking the person, hey, can you wait until we get to this? Can you wait until I've had an hour by myself? Can you wait until I finished my coffee or my glass of wine? Or can you just wait? Can I just have a little bubble of space if you're in that like touched out phase, or if you're in the caregiver phase, reminding yourself, hey, they're going to get better, or it's going to get better. This is a season. It's not forever. Like, it's not something that you're putting off for forever. It's just for now. And saying wait doesn't mean saying no. It doesn't mean refusing the person. It means I care about you. And having my husband listen to my waits makes me feel cared about and loved a lot. I don't know
Definitely.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and okay, so I think there's two things here. One, the conversation that happens here when abstinence is, you know, when we've got this dichotomy of abstinence is really hard on one side and not as hard on the other side. That communication that happens can reassure both sides. I still love you. Exactly.
and it's not like a breakup. It's not like it's not you, it's me. That's not what it's like. It's
no.
It's different than that. And that's something you have to kind of feel out as a couple to learn what the other person needs from you in that moment, like what kind of communication they need, figuring out how to talk about it. Because I mean, for some couples, they can just talk. And for other couples, it's more of this reading of signals and seeing what the other person responds to works better. And for my husband and I, it depends on our season, you know.
Right.
Sometimes we're very verbal about it, and other times it's much more, I don't want to say nonverbal, but we're definitely reading each other's body language and mood and just like, how are you doing? How was your day? Are you doing okay? Are you feeling okay? Especially if you have a spouse that's dealing with a medical problem, like just reiterating like that care for them and finding out how they are before you think about anything else, just those layers of communication over this. I think NFP helps with that a lot because when you're outside of those seasons of maybe it's not so hard abstinence and you've developed some of those skills and you've developed that ability to care for each other in other ways because you've already had these short periods of abstinence. So in that way, I see abstinence, even when it's hard, is a blessing because it really does develop those sides, that side of your marriage outside of the little children and health problems and
the difficult seasons help us truly learn and grow. Like,
yes.
And we know that through, Lent every year, right? Like we step out of Lent into Easter season and we're like, wow, okay, yes, I did actually really spiritually grow in the season. And it was really hard. And I did not enjoy giving up chocolate or whatever you gave up.
Exactly. But you almost have a mini Lent every month. If you think about it that way, you've got this period of biologically enforced abstinence, and you can use that. You can have that be a positive thing in your marriage and in your relationship. It doesn't have to be seen as this huge burden. And if it is easier for you, that's okay. Like some Lents are not horrible.
That's true. That's true. Some Lents are like really easy to go through. And you're like, wow, thank you for that grace, Lord.
And you still grow. Yes. And I think prayer is part of that too. And asking for God's assistance and then praying together about it. Like if you're having a hard time, not saying prayer is going to fix it, but at least taking that and being honest with God too. The main part about getting through abstinence for my husband and I has been the honesty and honesty with each other and honesty with God, being okay saying this is hard or this is easy or I don't know what to do here. Something needs to change. Those times are all valid and all an important part of growing and learning and connecting with your spouse.
Definitely. And, something else I want to mention is that like these conversations, I don't know if they've ever been easy for any spousal relationship. Like, don't think we're just talking about this going, oh yeah, we like talk about this every night and it's like easy peasy, rolls off our tongue. Like these are still, at least for me, and you can speak to your experience, Martha, like whenever I need to approach my husband about something like this, I still kind of like clam up a little bit. And I'm like, oh, this is such an uncomfortable topic to talk about. And I'm getting better. I'm definitely getting better. I think, hosting a weekly podcast, talking about it to, a bunch of strangers helps.
Yes.
And, having that really raw honesty with your spouse is really, really important, but it's not easy. And that's okay too. And you can preface that to your spouse. Like, okay, I need to talk to you about something. This is not easy for me to say. Like, can you let me get my words out and, let me figure this out as I'm trying to say it to you. Like, if I say something wrong, like, please don't get offended if I'm like, words aren't coming out correctly, because it can be uncomfortable, especially if this is, you're just starting to have these conversations with your spouse.
That's true. And feelings can get hurt on both sides. And the growth that comes with the conversations comes with some growing pains. I mean, it's not like, oh, I'm just going to tell my husband that I'm not interested tonight and he's going to be okay with that and we're going to move on and it's going to be fine. It's not really how it works.
No, not really.
Not really. And because, he can feel hurt. He can feel rejected and, or you can feel lonely or ignored and those difficult feelings, that's not something to brush off or shy away from or be like, oh, well, it'll just get better once abstinence over, then we'll be back to normal again. That how you interact during those hard times sets you up for what comes next,
Yes. And we actually mentioned this just a little bit in the previous episode. We were talking about that you can't just flip a switch between the time of abstinence and the time of not abstinence between your relationship. You need to continually do these things that we were kind of mentioning, speaking your spouse's other love languages, and being attentive to them. Wow, that was a lot of T's. In other ways that are not physical intimacy throughout your marriage. Like when sex is on the table and when it's not on the table. And that's exactly really important. And that's kind of what we were talking about like, you don't just become brother and sister when like your fertile window opens and it's like, oh, okay, bye. Like I'm going to go sleep in the other room. Yes. No, please don't do that.
No, the connection that you get during those abstaining times helps your marriage grow so much. Mm-hmm. It may not seem to be positive in the moment. It may seem to be really negative sometimes in those conversations. But how you recover from that and how you continue to talk to your spouse about it and not clam up and just say, well, fine, we just won't talk about it. We'll just be silent for a couple weeks and then we'll be good again. That it doesn't work. And especially if it's easier for one spouse, mm-hmm. being sympathetic, having that open ear, letting the other spouse be frustrated and not taking it upon yourself as being, well, that means I'm bad or something's wrong, right. Or just allowing that growth to take place is really hard, but so worth it.
So fruitful. So fruitful.
Exactly.
Okay. So what I'm thinking would probably be really helpful for our listeners before we close out is maybe just talking about like how, what are good ways to approach this conversation? What are good things to have in place or things to not have around when you're trying to have this conversation? I think what's coming to my mind first is if you have kids, have this conversation after the kids go to bed.
It is nice to have some privacy.
Yes.
I'd say for my husband, evenings can be harder. So early mornings can almost be better for us. Like that first wake up time, just when you're just there together. If the kids don't wake you up, can be a really fruitful time because you're both relaxed and you're in a pretty good place in the morning. Unless you're a coffee person, then get your coffee first.
Yeah. But, right. Well, that's important too. Is like making sure that the other person is in a place that they can have a deep conversation. Yes. If you're a coffee person, have the coffee first. If you need, if your spouse or you needs a half hour to wind down after you get home from work, don't start the conversation the second you or they walk in the door. Like that's like,
I think it's also important to come into the conversation with some good points too. Say, okay, this is what's working for me. This is what's positive for me. Especially if you're the person where things are difficult for, to come in and say, okay, I feel loved when you do this, or I feel loved when you do that. Having those in your back pocket and pulling them out first as part of the conversation kind of opens things up. That lets the other person know that you see what they're doing, that they are valued, that their efforts haven't been in vain, because they've probably been trying really hard, and giving your spouse the benefit of the doubt in those conversations, because some things can come out wrong and you can feel hurt and going, well, they tried to hurt me, or they're trying to manipulate me, or that can be a big damper on that connection that you do need to get out through these conversations. So going into it with an attitude of, okay, I'm going to put my rose-colored glasses on, whatever they say, and realize that they're trying to be honest with me and they're trying to communicate. And I'm not saying that they always are. There can be negative situations too, and you do need to be careful and protect yourself. And if you're in that kind of a situation where your spouse is manipulating you, but in these first opening conversations, if you're just getting started with this, start with, I'm going to try and see this in the best possible light, and go from there. And then if something comes out wrong, try and clarify it instead of throwing it back.
Right.
Instead of saying, oh, you hurt me, so now I'm going to come right back at you, say, okay, is this really what you meant? Because this is what I received. And often those type of healthy communication strategies can get you through having the positives to go along with the negatives, clarifying points where you feel like you're being hurt instead of fighting back, can take it from, me against him to the two of us trying to work through this together, which is the whole point, right?
Yes. And I think, another good kind of question to bring to this conversation is like, how can I, as your spouse, show you that I love you in these times of absence? Just finding out the answer to that question, because you may think it's something and then they don't even notice that. Like maybe you think that washing the dishes every night is showing your spouse that you love them. But your spouse just doesn't even notice that because that's just not even in their wheelhouse. And when in fact, just sitting down for 5 minutes and talking one-on-one with your spouse might really show them that you love them. Like that might fit the bill better for them. And this is kind of going back to that love languages thing.
Well, my husband, he won't tell me how his day went unless I ask him. So he needs that. I need to open the conversation for him, and then we can connect. And we've learned that over years, because I was like, man, why doesn't he ever just, especially when I had little kids and our communications patterns changed, because I'm just like, there's a baby on my hip and I'm cooking dinner and the kids are screaming in the other room and like everything's crazy. And he would come home and be like, hi, how are you? Here's the baby, and I realized we weren't connecting anymore. And I'm like, what is going on? Why doesn't he ever tell me what's happening at work? Like, why doesn't he ever do that? And if I not stop the cooking because we need to eat, and not stop the baby because the baby needs to be held. But if I look at him and give him full eye contact and be like, how was your day? Before I turn back to stirring something, that gives him the opening. So for us, it was me going, oh, I need to give him that opening. He's not going to just come in and take my attention. That for us was an important point. And also me cooking dinner. Like that sounds weird, but he doesn't, he's an acts of service kind of person. So if I come out with the food, then he just lights up. He's happy. And it's like, not
oh
like,
my gosh, dinner's here. I didn't have to cook
did
any of it.
this
That's
for
amazing.
Me? Yes.
Yeah.
And it's not like he's expecting me to be the traditional like housewife, barefoot in the kitchen, whatever. He's not oppressing me. It's not horrible. It's just something I can do to help him feel loved. But then there's also days where I go, okay, I'm done. He's like, oh, let's get something from the local restaurant around the corner. How's that, dear? He doesn't take it poorly when it doesn't happen, but it's something I know that I can do to help fill our kids, they call it bucket fillers in school now. Fill his bucket.
I like that.
So you go around filling other people's bucket, and you're a bucket filler by showing them that you care. So fill his bucket.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah.
And one other thought I had from kind of a physical, psychological aspect is that difficult conversations are easiest had when there is movement happening. So going for a walk with your spouse to have this conversation, may be a really good opportunity for you.
Or a drive.
You
can't see each other's faces and everybody's like, oh, well, you have to have a deep conversation. You stare into each other's eyes. I'm like, sometimes it's easier if you're not staring into each other's eyes, because then you can actually get out those words that you need to say.
That is such a good point, because it can be nerve-wracking. Even, I mean, this is your spouse. This is the person that you're supposed to be like giving yourself freely and totally to. But our human nature, our sin has just like messed that up in many, many ways.
And he has to learn who you are.
Yeah.
Like, you may be giving yourself totally and freely to him, and he may be giving himself totally and freely to you, and you may be just totally missing the gift. So it's time to have a discussion, and that's okay too. I mean, it's some of our best conversations are walking around outside and in a car on a road trip, because there's lots of time. Kids fall asleep.
Lots of time. Yeah. So this summer, when you're getting ready for that road trip, because you're not ready to take an airplane yet, which I totally get, start that conversation up.
Yeah.
when the kids all fall asleep in the back seat.
Or on their devices, because or
they're older. Like have their headphones in, watching a movie or watching Paw Patrol.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah, it's a struggle, but it's not an unwelcome struggle for me, I guess.
Yeah. So. Oh, Martha, I think this is a great place to just go ahead and end our episode, unless you had anything else you wanted to add in before we close out.
No, I'm good. Thanks, Helen.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. This was a great conversation. I loved having you back on the podcast.
It was great to be here.
Thanks so much for listening. Remember, you can follow Charting Toward Intimacy on Instagram. It's pretty easy to find at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you ever have any questions, comments, or an idea for an episode in the future, please reach out to me either on Instagram, or you can send me an email, and my email's in the show notes. Until next time.